Today is a lesson on the QU words in Latin. The first one, and probably the most important one to remember as far as charts are concerned, is the relative pronoun. Now, we translate these relatives with words in English like who, whom, whose, which, and that. That's okay to use every once in a while when we're going into English from the Latin. Now, the purpose of this pronoun is to relate back to something that we've previously been used. That we call that an antecedent. Most of the time, it is in Latin. It'll be the noun that is nearest to the relative. Although that's not always the case, especially whenever we get into poetry or more complex translations. Rules to know, or three things that we want to know about relative pronouns. Number one, each relative will create a clause that is separate from the main idea. And let's look at this right here. In English, we have, in English we have, the man who lives in the villa likes horses. What I mean by it creates its own idea is this. If I take it out, if I just take that whole who lives in the villa out, I have the man likes horses, and that's a completely okay sentence. Each relative clause will create a clause that is separate from the main idea. Now, on the other hand, who lives in the villa has to be a question if it's by itself. So in English, we call that a dependent clause. Who lives in the villa relies on the man likes horses in order for its survival for the sentence. Number two, the antecedent will give the gender and the number to the relative. So the gender and the number, so whether or not it is masculine, feminine, or neuter, or whether it is singular or plural, is dependent upon the antecedent. Now that's that word that it refers back to. So if I go back down here to the man, who refers back to man. So whose gender will be masculine and whose number will be singular, because man is masculine and singular. However, let's go back up here. The case, the grammatical use, the case of the relative within the clause determines the case. So when I go back down here to this guy, what does that mean, Coach Trammell, that the grammatical use is what determines the case? The word who lives in the villa. The word who in that clause is being used in what capacity grammatically? Is it the subject? Is it the direct object? Is it the object of a preposition? In this case, who is the person doing the living? So we have a subject. So even though that the number and the gender here are determined by man, because it is the subject, it will be nominative. Because it is the subject of this clause, it will be nominative. And that'll make sense here in a little bit when we go over a few more of these. So those are really the three things that we want to pay attention to when we're dealing with relative pronouns. One, they create a clause that is separate from the main idea. It is related to it, but it is a separate idea. Number two, the antecedent gives us the gender and the number. And the grammatical use gives us the case. It's number three. Now the chart itself is an important chart because we're going to use this particular chart here about 8,000 times before Latin is finished. You're going to use qui, quod, cus, 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 cui, cui, cui. Now if you look, here's a nice clue when you're dealing with pronouns. You're a lot of times going to get IUS in the genitive, and you're going to get a dative that's in the I. That's not exclusive, but that's a pretty good rule to follow. So here we have our singular. They are qui, qui, quod, cuus, 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 cui, 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 quim, quam, quod, quo, qua, quo. And then for our plurals, we have qui, 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 quorum, 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 quibus, 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 quos, quos, qui, quibus, quibus, quibus. So how do I use this relative pronoun? Well, that's what we're going to talk about right here. In this sentence, we have the man who lives in the villa likes horses. Well, we know the word man is the subject of this verb, which is likes. We're going to use amat for likes. We know that the direct object of likes is horses. So we're going to have equos, because it's plural, it's accusative, it's my direct object. And now we have to break down this relative clause. We're always going to start our relative with the QU word. So we're going to put QU here. We're going to ask ourselves, what is its number and what is its gender based on man? Man is masculine and singular. So I'm going to go to singular. I'm going to go to masculine. The answer to that qui has to be one of those 5 words. It has to be masculine and singular. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 choices. The case of the word who, the case, whether it's nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, or ablative, does not depend on man. It depends on how it's used inside this clause. In this case, we've already said who is the subject. Nominative is the subject form, so we use qui. Where has nothing to do with the case of qui. In this case, they happen to be the same, but they don't have to be, because who is determined, the case of who is going to be determined by how it's used inside this relative clause. We have the word lives, so that is habitat. As a habit for me, I like to end my relative clause with that verb so people can see where I stop my clause. I start it with my QU word, and then I'm going to end it with my verb over there. And then I have in the villa. We know in for our preposition. Now we have to ask ourselves right here when we get to villa, is it into the villa? The answer is no, it's in the villa, so it's ablative. If it were into the villa, then we would have to have am for accusative. Okay, now whenever we are trying to find the grammatical use of each word to put it into English, we know, like I said, man is the subject of the sentence, so we made it, let me erase that so we can see it all. We know that man is the subject of the sentence, so we chose the nominative form. We know that the verb likes is a verb, so we made it agree with man, so we gave it a T, right, amat. We'll go ahead and put this up here one more time. So we know it's a verb. We know that that was nominative. Horses was our direct object of the main verb. It was the direct object of the main verb, so I chose accusative and plural. These right here, these that are left, were my relative clause. The subject of my relative clause was qui. It got its gender and its number from man. It got its case from where it is being used inside that clause. The verb in the relative clause is live, so I use habitat. I make it agree, third person singular, with qui. And then I use my prepositional phrase. And you can look at that a couple of times. The color coordination may help you. If you want to hit pause, you can check that out for a second. Now, how to use these in English, I color coordinate these as well. All of the red words, the qui, the quai, the quod, the qui, the quai, and the quai. If they're singular, it's going to be who, masculine or feminine singular. If it's masculine or singular neuter, it's going to be which. It's going to be the same case for the plural. So who, and who. If you see these words and you decide that they are nominative, those are all going to be translated as who. Blue words, cuis, all are going to be whos. Whether they are masculine or feminine, it does not matter. Right here. And by the way, I messed up. Those should be which. I messed those up. Sorry. So all the blue words are going to be whos. All of the green words that are left, we're going to follow the regular rules that we have for dative, which is we're going to translate it as 2 or 4. And we're going to use the word whom for all of the greens. So our dative would be to whom, or for whom. Our accusatives are going to be used as a direct object. We're just going to translate that as whom. And then our ablatives will be normally will be part of our prepositions. So we'll have in which or through whom or whatever we're going to use for our prepositional phrase that takes the ablative. So those are our relative pronouns. Let's look at this slowly. We're going to use man again. And we're going to say the man, and here's the English whom I gave, whom I gave the horses, lives in the villa. This should sound a little awkward to us because in English we would say to whom. We would say the man to whom I gave the horses. So you have to be careful when we go into English using that whom. Well, if I'm using to whom, Coach Trammell, then that must mean that this particular relative clause, that to whom is going to be cooey. It is singular, it is masculine because of man. It is dative because it is the indirect object of gave. So, what is the subject of that particular sentence? Ego, I, is the subject. Gave is my verb. We have horses is going to be, actually gave would be past tense. Horses is going to be my direct object. It is plural, so I'm going to make sure I make it plural. This is just my relative clause. Now the subject of the main sentence is man, so I put man here. The prepositional phrase is in wheela, and then my verb is habitat. Oh, sorry about that. It's habitat. Once again, the relative cui refers to man, but in this case, it is not going to be nominative because it's not being used as a subject inside of that clause. In this case, it's being used as the indirect object of that relative clause. So, make it dative. And again, like I said, I like to put the verb at the end of my relative so that people know that I'm finished with my relative clause. So if I write, the man to whom I gave the horses lives in the villa, if I'm writing it in Latin, I would write vir cui. I wouldn't use ego at all. Equos, because I want to use dedi last. This tells people that my relative clause is done, finished. And then I have in wheela, and then I like to end my sentences with the verb as well to tell people that my thought process is over. So verbs, I like to put at the end to tell people that I'm finished with my sentence. Okay, those are relatives. We're going to move on to interrogative pronouns. Once again, the chart is important, but we need to know these things right here as well. The purpose of an interrogative pronoun is to introduce a question. If I want to say, who lives in the villa? I want to say, who lives in the villa? Then I'm going to use one of these words, or one of these words for who. Now, just like the relative, it must agree with the antecedent. So if I'm looking for a girl or singular girl or a singular guy, I'm going to use either quis, quis, qui, quim, or quo. If it's neuter, then I'm going to use quid, quis, cui, quid, or quo. If it's plural, and I'm looking for masculine, and I'm going to have to deal with these words. If it's feminine, these words, and if it's neuter plural, I use those. But it has to agree with what I'm asking about. If it's a guy, For a person, and maybe I don't know if it's a guy or a girl, I'm going to use quis for this who, because who is being used as a subject. So just like the relative, it has to agree with whatever the antecedent may be. Now, the case is determined, again, on how it's used in the sentence. So if I'm introducing a question, I'm going to use these interrogative pronouns. If you'll notice, the cool thing is that these qui, qui, quotes, these plurals right here, are the same ones that we have right here. They're the same thing that we use for the plural relatives, the same endings. What's different are the singulars. The singulars aren't. The singulars here, quis, quid, quis, cui, quim, quid, quo, quo, they're different, but the plurals are the same, so I'm really only having to memorize half of a chart instead of a full chart, if I've memorized my relative pronoun chart. So who lives in the villa? Introducing a question, so I'm going to use one of these forms. So I want to ask myself, what is the gender of who? The gender is, we're not sure. It's either masculine or feminine. We may know from the previous sentence, but we're not sure which one it is in this particular case. What is its number, singular or plural? Well, in this case, it's going to be singular. And this is our clue. If I say they live, make it plural, it would be live. Who live in the villa? That doesn't make much sense. So who lives, we're going to make it singular. We're going to make it singular. That's the number. And now, how's it being used here? I like to, if I'm trying to figure out how it's being used, I like to replace it with words like he, she, or it to see how it's being used. In this case, she lives in the villa. She would be the subject of that sentence, so the case is going to be nominative. Once again, I'm looking for a nominative. I'm looking for a singular. I'm looking for a masculine or a feminine, and I come up with the word quis. And how did I come up with that word? After I determined the gender, which was masculine or feminine, the number, singular, and the case, all of them quis. Lives. Again, this is my verb. I want to determine what tense it is in. Well, this is in the present tense. The number, is it singular or plural? Well, it's singular. It has to agree with the subject of the sentence, which in this case is going to be quis. So now I need a number. Is this first, second, or third person? Well, it doesn't refer to I. It doesn't refer to you. It refers to who, which is a third person. So third person singular present tense of lives is habitat. Now, T defines third person. And then in the villa is our prepositional phrase again, in villa. And this time, don't forget, we have a question mark and not a period. Now, Coach Tremble told you earlier that he likes to use the verb at the end. So I would change this to quis, villa, habitat. And all this all this interrogative pronoun is doing is introducing that question. So that's the interrogative pronoun. When do I use quis and quid? When do I use these guys right here, these interrogative pronouns? I'm trying to ask a question. So I'm not going to use qui to ask a question. I'm going to use quis. I'm not going to use quod for a question. I'm going to use quid. Follow my neuter rule. I have quim here. Those are really only differences that I have from this chart that I've already used for the relatives. And the difference between this relative chart and this interrogative chart is very simple. These right here create a relative clause. They're going to have an antecedent within the sentence, and they're going to create a relative clause. These interrogative pronouns are going to create a question. That's it. That's the difference between those two. Now, we move to indefinite adjectives. They act just like adjectives. They're going to modify a noun. Sometimes that noun is understood, and we call that a substantive. But here's the cool thing about this. if I pull all of these DAMs off, this should look familiar to you because I have qui, qui, quod, quis, 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 cui, 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 and then I have quin, quan, and quod, quo, qua, quo. The only difference is the M's have changed to N. And they do the same thing over here with the quorant and the quorum and the quorant. They change to N. So if I can remember to change my M's to an N when I'm dealing with indefinite adjectives, then what I have here is just a relative pronoun chart. Qui, qui, quod, qui, 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 quis, 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 quorum, 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 cui, 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 quibus, quibus, quibus. They're the same that we had for the relatives. Let's look back. Qui, qui, quod, qui, qui, quod, qui, 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 quis, all the way, quorum, 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 cui, all the way across here, quibus, all the way across here, quim, quam, quod, quos, quas, qui, quo, qua, quo, quibus, all the way across. If I add DAM to all of these, then I'm going to end up with my indefinite adjective. That's it. All I have to remember is that these M's right here are going to change to N. Add my DAMs, and now I have my indefinite adjectives. Now, how am I going to use those? Well, I'm going to use the word some for my indefinites. So if I have some men are in the road, some is an adjective referring to men. We're not sure how many. How many? 5, 4, 3. We're not sure. That's what means indefinite. It's not defined. We don't know how many men we're dealing with. So whenever I get to this adjective, it's going to agree in case, number, and gender. So I'm going to case, my number, and my gender is going to agree with the word that it modifies. Men is the subject of this sentence, so the case is going to be nominative. Men is plural. The gender is masculine. Are is going to be third person. It's plural, has to agree with its subject, and it's present tense. In the road is a prepositional phrase. So I need to find the case, number, and gender, nominative, plural, and masculine. So I want to go over here to the plural side now, find my masculine, and find the nominative form. Here it is, quidam. In this case, we would have quidam. Men plural is weary, if I use the nominative plural form. The plural form of our third person plural present is sunt. And then I have in the road, I have in, and then road is our quia. That's it. We have some men are in the road. Now, when I use a linking verb, it's not as important to put it at the end of the sentence or at the end of the clause. You can if you want. I always do it. But because it is linking two things together, a lot of times it's okay not to put it at the end. But I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I would put quidam weary in wila sunt. And that would be how I would put that into Latin. So hopefully this helps you out with those QU words that have been bothering you.